It's Tuesday, October 31st. Happy Halloween. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It is a hell of a day to talk ball, and joining me to do just that is Andy Behrens, or AC Andy Behrens on this particular episode. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that Andy Behrens is in a hell of an Arthur Smith costume, which means 50% of the hosts on this show got the memo that we were doing costumes. Andy, what's going on, buddy? Hell of a costume this year.
I didn't need a memo. I was coming in costume anyway. At least one of us respected the spirit of the Halloween episode. I'm happy to do it. I think I was considering this earlier. I think I'm going to stay in character as Arthur Smith. Not throughout this podcast, but on Halloween night, like answering the door, I'm just going to belittle every kid that rings the bell. They're going to be like, trick or treat. And I'm going to be like, well, that's toxic groupthink, kid. It doesn't have to be trick or treat. We can use the trick to set up the treat. If you'd watch film, you'd know that. Something like that. I'm workshopping here.
I'm just imagining you, Andy, like in the Arthur Smith mold of every single time he gets a question at a press conference, it really doesn't matter what it's about. He's just like this close to having his eyes roll into the back of his head. He's so exasperated. I'm imagining you just like completely bent out of shape and just belittling these poor, I don't know, 8th graders. Do 8th graders trick or treat? 8-year-olds, 6-year-olds, just these kids are on the verge of tears. They're about to have like the night of their life, but instead you're belittling them about Desmond Ritter doesn't have he has a concussion. Okay. I'm holding him out because I believe in player safety or whatever.
Kid, it's not about how many treats we get. You think Ethan next door cares how many treats he's getting? We're about winning. We're about winning here. That's all Ethan cares about.
Well, I mean, I guess I can be in costume as the reporter that you're pissed off at, or whatever. Whatever like straw man that Arthur Smith is irritated at every single week, whether it's a fantasy analyst, a reporter, or anybody who dares to question anything that comes out of Coach Smith's mouth. So hey, there you go.
Hell of a couple of weeks for Coach Smith, by the way. This is basically this is peak Arthur Smith these last like 10 days or so.
He's in the worst possible position too, and he's put himself in this position, so I don't feel bad about him. I have said nice things about Arthur Smith's offense over the last couple of years. I don't want that to be mistaken as like, oh yeah, Matt Harmon loves himself some Arthur Smith. Like I want to split a meal with Arthur Smith. I don't think I really want to do that at this point. So when I say that, like he's put himself in this position, and he's in the worst possible part of it too, because the more cantankerous you are and the more weird things you do, you're going to get questions about how weird you're being. And people know you're going to be cantankerous, so they push your buttons even more in the press conferences. And he's just in like a hell spiral at this point.
Yeah, he's also just like, he's weird and ornery about everything. So when like a big issue comes up, or when there is some like legitimate reason to hedge, he's never going to get the benefit of the doubt, right? Because it's always just more of Arthur Smith being a jerk at an inopportune moment. I
know. Even this whole thing with Desmond Ritter, where 99% of the time people on the outside and in the media are like, you know, hats off to you for like erring on the side of caution with player safety, right? And where, like I said that at the top, where he's basically said on Monday at his press conference, like, I'm conservative with these medical decisions. And, you know, it's not the first time I've done this with a player where they were cleared by the concussion protocol and I just didn't send them back out there for the good of the player. And like, he might well be telling the truth about that. But like, who in their right mind is going to just be like, yeah, I take you at face value, Coach Smith.
Exactly. Yeah, no, he's earned zero credibility to this point.
All right. Well, hey, again, hell of a costume to you. To be honest, I didn't even realize that this podcast was coming out on Halloween. It's a lot going on in my world right now. The last thing I was thinking about was what is going to be my Halloween costume on the podcast. So I apologize for dropping the ball as the host of the show. But nevertheless, we're going to try to give you a good program here. You know what we do here. It's the People's Panic Meter on these Tuesday podcasts. We will get into that. We'll get into the coping corner and everything. We'll get into waiver wire pickups. But we do have a couple of pieces of quick news to clean up here, Andy. Injuries that we feared the worst for, we have confirmation today. One, torn Achilles for Kirk Cousins. He's going to miss the entire year. We don't need to like kind of break this down because he's going to come up in the panic segment later on. Kendrick Bourne also torn ACL. He's going to miss the rest of the season, which is a real bummer because Kendrick Bourne was playing really well. And there have been several times where I've said he's the only guy on the team that beats man coverage consistently, which is problematic when A, that guy is Kendrick Bourne for you, and B, now is not going to play the rest of the season.
Yeah, this is two veterans who over the last, like, not just year, but, probably a season and a half, have basically played the best football of their careers. Kirk has been great. Like, Kirk has been really, really good. Obviously, the Niners game was a terrific performance. He was having another great performance this week. Just a bummer. Terrible to, obviously the relationship between Kirk Cousins and the team, whatever you imagined it was, is even stronger, right? The team was kind of wrecked after that game. So I just feel awful for him. There's separate fantasy fallout and fantasy problems that we'll talk about related to this. But you just feel terrible for two vets who were playing really, really well.
I'm really glad you said that, especially about Kirk, because I said a lot on the podcast in the offseason, like I had weirdly become Kirk-pilled after last season, which statistically wasn't one of his best years, but I think the way that he and Kevin O'Connell kind of came together to bring the best out of that offense was sneakily made that Kirk's best season, and he was continuing that this year to the point where, it's not as if it's like, he's playing good for Kirk Cousins or he's playing well, keeping the train on the tracks. Like, no, he was just playing good football. And we've talked about this literally a week ago yesterday, Andy, and we probably were not kind enough to Kirk Cousins in that conversation that we are having a quarterback. I'm not going to call it a crisis, but certainly a situation here with quarterbacks in the NFL. And now one of the guys that is sort of on that borderline of we trust him to be a quality starter every single week is now wiped off the board.
Yeah, we couldn't come up with very many right answers at quarterback, right? Like, you're pretty happy if you drafted Tua because you've profited to this point. And Kirk was like one of the other few clear wins where no matter where you took him, he's outperformed it. He started the season with a bunch of 350-yard games. He's been great. We maybe got a little worried during the first game without Justin Jefferson, but then, he put that to rest against the Niners. He was just playing spectacular football. And he was, again, one of, I don't know, 2 or 3 absolute, no question about it, profit leaders at the quarterback position, right? Even the guys at the top who are at the top of the, scoring leaders, they haven't separated necessarily. And relative to where you drafted them, they haven't been like filthy steals or anything like that, but Kirk had been.
It's a real bummer. And again, we'll talk about the trickle down effect for the rest of this offense later on. Couple of transactions. The trade deadline is alive and well. We've got it started. We'll have a full breakdown, reactions for if there's more stuff that happens on the podcast coming out tomorrow. So keep that in mind. But we did get the first one here. First domino to fall. Seattle trades for Giants defensive lineman Leonard Williams, sends a 2nd-round pick in 2024 and a 5th-round pick in 2025. Pretty good move for one of the few bright spots on the. Well, I don't know. There's actually, Dexter Lawrence next to Leonard Williams is one of the best interior defensive pass rushers in the NFL, despite the fact that he plays nose tackle. So, but Williams was a bright spot. It's a good move for Seattle. And then from more of a fantasy perspective, Leonard Fournette signs with the Bills practice squad. Andy, I mean, how about that?
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of talk in fantasy circles about Leonard Fournette. I don't see this as like hugely value impacting for James Cook. I mean, there's probably whatever ceiling scenario you'd imagine for James Cook was already gone, and now it's really gone. But I don't think this is, I don't think that Leonard Fournette is taking over any sort of important role that currently belongs to Cook. He's played, he's played well within his job. I love Seattle doing this. Seattle, by the way, a division leader right now, as San Francisco has fallen off and lost a string of games. Seattle suddenly like in first place in that division. This is exactly what they ought to be doing. They've got some dudes on defense already. This is fun. This is really, really fun. That division is going to be an absolute war now.
Said it on the show with Scott yesterday that offense is like this close, man.
Yeah.
It really is. And, obviously I don't want to yada quarterback turnover issues, but like if Geno can just clean up some of these ill-timed interceptions, like I think this offense would really be firing. If they could just push it in the red zone, they would really be firing. So that combined with the defense that should get better with Williams coming in the mix here, it's good news for Seattle, and they can absolutely win this division, no question about it. If the Niners don't just kind of push the pedal to the floor here, so we shall see what happens there. All right, with that, let's move into the post week 8 People's Panic Meter segment. You know the deal. The show is all about you, the people. So every week we reach out to you to see what has you panicked heading into a Monday morning about your fantasy team after all the action on Sunday. Best responses get into the show. You can shoot a note to fantasy mailbag at yahoosports.com. We have a ton of submissions in the mailbag this week. You can also hit us on social media at @MattHarmon_BYB or at Andy Behrens. But before we get to the panic meter, we do have to introduce a new member to the Coping Corner, Andy. Our 2 current players in the Coping Corner, which, by the way, if you are new, that means we have no more advice on how to proceed. You just got to cope with the reality of the situation for these players. So far, we have inducted Ramondre Stevenson and Christian Watson. And after week 8, Andy, I feel very good about those 2 fellas being in the Coping Corner. So no need to make any adjustments there. Who is your nominee for this week's Coping Corner?
I do not have new things to say about Trevor Lawrence, and I don't want to have to address him in the weeks ahead. He's going into a bye, so we were probably going to get to take a week off from panicking about Jaguars anyway, right? Mm-hmm. But man, in my view, he's played really well. He threw a terrible interception this past weekend, but that aside, he's played really well. His team is 6-2. They're certainly a threat to have home field in the AFC at this point. They're really good. Ball's coming out of his hand really well. I get it. There have been some disappointing moments with Calvin Ridley. There have been some disappointing moments. Other receivers have dropped passes. They've been close on some things that they haven't hit. He doesn't have more than 2 TD passes in any given week. I still think he's playing reasonably well. And in a week when 5 quarterbacks went down, you've got one who's reasonably healthy and is playing well and has a good receiving core. I know he doesn't have the friendliest schedule coming up down the stretch, but it is still a good group of receivers. It is a good, the team context generally is great. I feel like maybe some of the issue is just that, man, Travis Etienne is having one of those years. He's kind of the centerpiece of the offense. That is maybe not what we expected, but he's having an all-pro season. I don't have bad things to say about Trevor Lawrence. I'm not going to rubber stamp, a drop on Trevor Lawrence, which is, I feel, what people are really asking for when they reach out about him. He'll probably get kicked to the curb in a bunch of leagues this weekend when waivers process, because he's on bye. People have needs at other positions. I get it. I just think he's playing really, really well, and I wouldn't in leagues where I've got Trevor Lawrence, I'm not doing anything with him. I think he's a really good player who is going to have some multi-touchdown games down the road.
The funny part about the Jaguars being a consistent member of the panic meter submissions.
Yeah.
And like you said, they're going into a bye this week, so we won't hear much about them. We did the full timeline breakdown on why we got here with Calvin Ridley, why we got a little too high on Calvin Ridley, although 10 targets last week, over 80 yards. It's fine. It's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. It's just probably not going to be what you expected. The funny part about all of this, constant panic about the Jaguars is, like you said, they're 6-2. They have the same record as the Dolphins. They have the same record as the Chiefs. They would be. They have the 3rd best record in the conference right now, just because of others. Yeah. The games they've played and stuff like that. They're one of the best teams record-wise in the NFL, and we are all still agreeing that they haven't played their best football. That makes you a good team, full stop, period. If we all feel like you haven't played your best ball, there's more potential there, and you're winning games. You're a good team. The Jaguars are a good team. Trevor Lawrence is a good quarterback, and from just a pure fantasy perspective, right now he's quarterback 14. Here are some of the names ahead of him. Jordan Love at quarterback 13. Josh Dobbs, quarterback 12. I'm pretty comfortable saying Trevor Lawrence is going to leapfrog Jordan Love. Jared Goff, Russell Wilson, Brock Purdy, Sam Howell. He was drafted at QB 8. I think it's conceivable that Lawrence goes on a run and is at QB 8 or 9. And if you drafted him at QB 8 or 9 and he didn't take the leap, he just was what he was, I don't think you can really be too panicked about it. And coping sounds too negative of a word with Trevor Lawrence, and we're both being positive here. So, but I'm with you that I don't really want to talk about Jaguars panic anymore. And you bring up a great point with ETN as well, where not only has Travis Etienne and the run game been way better than expected, even if we like them in fantasy, like he's been just a better real life runner than we could have expected. The defense has been way better than expected too.
Yeah.
That's been a critical thing in like why they're not throwing the ball all over the yard.
Yeah, you're so like they're as you were speaking, like they remind me in some ways of the Eagles, right? Where like we all agree that the Eagles are not playing their absolute best football. They're winning. Like they're like that is almost an ideal position to be in, right? Like I'm sure it would be great to be, a Death Star, on offense and defense right now, and they're not. But they're getting wins. Man, they could have won that Chiefs game too. Like the Jaguars are just flat out a good team, and they're pretty good in all respects. And more to the point, like I understand people's fantasy frustration with Trevor Lawrence, because with almost everybody that we talk about in the panic meter, they aren't like, you're not panicking about your wide receiver 3 who you knew good and well was going to be a wide receiver 3. You're panicking about all these guys that you thought might level up by like, 1 or 2 tiers, right? And you thought they were going to potentially carry you. You got hooked by the hey, is Trevor Lawrence an MVP candidate talk? And okay, that's not happening, but it doesn't mean that you can't win a fantasy league with this guy, and it certainly doesn't mean that he can't finish very near his ADP in the year-end ranks. And I would imagine that he would. He's also just had like, he's on pace to rush for more yards than he has in any single season. Hasn't found the end zone yet on the ground, and that's coming too. So like there's some points out there in the second half of the season. I would expect this to correct a little bit, but again, I feel like I'm given the same pep talk every week, and I don't have new material on Trevor Lawrence.
It's really hard for me to look at you in this get up, and you're doing like the classic like Andy Behrens shrug and smile. Like I don't have to tell you, like it's
I
really
should
hard
stay in character. I should absolutely really stay in character.
You should have roasted anybody. Like, actually, Arthur Smith would be a great co-host. Actual Arthur Smith would be a great co-host for the Panic Meter segment for the times when we want to tell people not to panic. And he would definitely be talking down to all of our listeners. And actually, never mind, I don't want him on the podcast, but he is good for those type of things that you just had that monologue on. I'll offer my candidate for the coping corner here. And I knew about, I don't know, midway 75% through the early games yesterday that I was going to be nominating this guy for the coping corner, and I had to try not to spoil it on the recap podcast, but I think Dameon Pierce belongs in the coping corner at this point, man, because dude hadn't caught a pass in almost a month. October 8th was the last time Dameon Pierce caught a pass. Last time he's been targeted, okay? He's been in a straight-up committee with Devin Singletary. They're not running the ball really well. He obviously was close to a touchdown, like worst sequence ever, where you think he's got a touchdown. It goes to a break. They come back, and you're like, actually, not a touchdown. Let's give it to Andrew Beck. He bangs it in. Literally helps nobody in fantasy. It's miserable. And I really do think like this was I don't love this type of analysis, but it felt like one of those moments where if he's not going to do it against the Carolina Panthers, he's probably just not going to do it generally because this was a good matchup. And he's just, again, like I said, in a straight up committee right now in a Texans backfield that is not running the ball extremely well. And that's problematic. I also kind of think like maybe he's just not a system fit for Bobby Slowick's offense, right? He's not the guy that they drafted. It's a previous staff pick. I think Dameon Pierce is a pretty interesting runner and a pretty exciting guy to watch in the right moments, but I just don't think it's going to happen on this Texans team. And I think you have to cope with that at this point and just like forget about where you drafted him, forget about the preseason hype. And I know I fell for that crap too, Andy. And it's, again, it's tough for me to do this while you're dressed in this costume, but I do this with Dalton a lot. I'm going to look you in the eye and I'm telling you right now, if next August I'm all yeah. Now you're making me feel bad about myself, which means the Arthur Smith costume.
Trying to give you the Arthur Smith gaze. Yeah.
Yeah, that one, it's like, you're an idiot. Well, I am an idiot because I'll tell you what, Andy, if next August I'm sitting here quoting like preseason snap shares for running backs, and he played
yeah.
100% of the snap with the first team offense. I want you to load me into a cannon, light the fuse, and fire me into the freaking sun. I'm not doing that again next year, okay? With preseason playing time, snap counts, and player participation in the preseason. It's not going to happen. Probably will happen, but I'm saying right now it's not going to happen because I think that is what got me hook, line, and sinker fooled with this Dameon Pierce thing. And again, he's on some of my teams. You can tell I am coping with the reality of the situation here.
That is, by the way, a really good lesson from preseason because we almost have too much information available to us in the preseason, right? Because a guy will be, oftentimes those first string offenses will be out there for a series, for 2 series. Like, what does it matter that one guy was on the field for all 8 snaps that CJ Stroud played or whatever? You know that he's not going to be out there for every single snap during the regular season. You know that's not how football works. So, yeah, I certainly agree with that. We should be fairly dismissive of that sort of analysis. I've got Dameon Pierce in a couple places. We had talked him up a little bit on FFL because the matchup was so good, and it is notable that basically Dameon Pierce got them within inches of the goal line on both touchdowns, right? It wasn't just the Beck touchdown. It was like, I mean, Dameon Pierce got him like inches from the goal line on the CJ Stroud touchdown too. Yeah. It was just, it was brutal if you've got him on a roster because you're not really getting a receiving role at this point. It was low key one of the more painful fantasy experiences of the week was, needing anything at all out of Dameon Pierce. I still don't know exactly what they saw to overturn that first call. I thought that one was going to stand. I didn't get it. You can tell I have a little bit of Dameon Pierce. So tough scene there. I don't mind conceding this one and actually taking a break from talking about Dameon Pierce because I don't, short of an injury to Singletary, I don't necessarily see this getting better.
Right. Like I think it is what it is. And I think he makes a perfect candidate for our third guy in the coping corner here. Because the worst part is like, and I think this is probably good analysis, like James Coe, who did a great job filling in for me at FFL and obviously works with me over at Reception Perception too. He was talking about like Dameon Pierce is going to smash against the Carolina Panthers and you need to sell him right after that, yes. Right? Because the schedule's no good. The role stinks. Well, too bad because now you don't even get to do that. Like now you don't even get to try to take him to the trade market off of a big game because he had 46 scoreless yards on a measly 12 carries. So it is literally the worst possible outcome. And I don't know like I said, I have him on a couple of teams and there is nothing to do except cope with the reality of where we're at.
Yeah, the teams on which I have him, I've for the most part, I've got to keep playing him too. Like one's like a 16-team league where I'm really good. I have ETN in that league, but like the one squishy spot on my roster right now is actually Dameon Pierce, and I can't make it better. He plays a little bit too much for me not to use him, and it's just been particularly this past week, just bitter disappointment.
Oh, 100%. There's nothing you can do, right? That's like I said, I'm gonna keep rolling Dameon Pierce out there and just like pray to God he falls into the end zone. Another term that I hate, but I'm using it here. Just fall into the friggin' end zone there. Fall a couple more inches forward, and we have at least one touchdown from last week. So that's where we're at with Dameon Pierce. It is what it is. All right. Let's move on to the other week 8 submissions from the people, Andy, for the People's Panic Meter. Starting with the guy people really wanted me to put in the coping corner. Like, I mean, I was getting tweets, which, by the way, I love when you guys tweet me about this stuff. It's just nice that I know there are real human beings like listening to this. Andy, we see the numbers with the pod. It's like, okay, people are really listening to this allegedly, but it's nice when you interact with real humans and they're like, oh, you listen to this? That's pretty cool. Thank you. Anyways, so a lot of people tweeting to me. I'm sure you got some of it too on Sunday. Like Tony Pollard needs to go into the coping corner. We got a lot of submissions with Tony Pollard. I want to give a shout out to 3 people here that sent in some good ones, starting with Hoops55, who sent in this video. Let's hear it.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Andy. Absolutely love the show, but we've got to talk about Tony Pollard. As someone who has a lot of invested in him across multiple leagues, it's absolutely infuriating watching the Dallas Cowboys scheme him into literally the Zeke role, which does not work week over week over week. Up the middle for 3 yards, up the middle for 5 yards. It's like they completely forgot that this guy was so good in space last year and was so good in a passing role, like a CMC, like an Austin Eckler. Are we going to have to continue to deal with the fact that we've got a workhorse and a rare bell cow running back who does nothing but go up the gut? Or do we see this getting any better down the road? Thanks, guys.
All right, so I want to react to Hoop's message particularly here, but also got to give a shout out to these two folks as well. One, Gretchen D. She actually sent in 2 emails. She says, "My apologies for my first attempt at sending in my panic meter email. That is how panicked I am at Tony Pollard." She just sent in an initial email with just the subject, no message to it. So she's so tilted about Tony Pollard. She's sending in multiple emails here. She says, "I have him in too many of my leagues. What is happening? Do you think there's any hope for him?" Steve B. Sent in, they're in a 16-team standard league and couldn't keep A.J. Brown again. So they used A.J. Brown in a trade package to get Kirk Cousins, yikes, bad timing, Tony Pollard, and Mike Evans. So I don't know, man. I have a lot of thoughts about the Tony Pollard situation, Andy. I am curious where you stand.
First of all, like shout out to Hoops55 for drilling down to something important in Pollard's usage. I think it is entirely possible that we have multiple factors here, some of which is Pollard himself, right? He's coming off a pretty significant injury, and we've seen, his I think his missed tackle total right now at the halfway mark is like 8 or something like that. It's really low.
8.
It ain't big. His yards after contact per attempt is really low, like by far a career low. So those things don't look great, and we know he's coming off a pretty significant late season injury. Also, as Hoops55 said, he's getting a lot of that sort of ugly work that we didn't really like from Zeke Elliott last year, and is maybe not the highest and best use of Tony Pollard, right? A lot of between the tackle stuff that is only ever going to go for 2, 3, 4 yards. Not particularly fruitful carries. He's not getting outside, not a lot of zone runs this year. So it is somewhat different usage, and that obviously matters. The other change here is that, early in the season when I was defending Tony Pollard, when we were like, maybe not we, but at least I was like, man, the breakout's coming, the big week is coming. A lot of it relied on red zone usage. Like nobody was getting red zone touches like Pollard was. Nobody had the, short of Christian McCaffrey. And I think for a while there, Pollard was ahead of McCaffrey in terms of red zone carries. That's dried up over the last month. Like he's got like 5 red zone carries over the last 4 weeks, couple inside the 10. And that's not that's kind of what I was banking on before. And then you look at this past weekend, his team led 26-3. They led 33-3. That's the game script that should result in a very nice afternoon for Tony Pollard. Number one, you'd think that he would have been a part of that. And then number two, you'd think, okay, once we're up multiple scores, it'll be the Tony Pollard show. Now we're in this situation where like he's not being put in situations to be explosive, and perhaps he is not as explosive as we might have seen last year. And then they get inside the 20 and they're still throwing. Like we just saw a blow up game from CeeDee Lamb, who's great, who's awesome, and good for the Cowboys for funneling opportunities to their best player. That's part of it as well. So we've got like a perfect storm of usage and maybe a little bit of regression.
You hit the nail on the head there with the regression part of it, because there's a lot going on here. And that's why it's kind of a complicated subject. I was not ready to put him in the coping corner yet. So he was not going to be a guy I really considered to nominate, because I don't think we're quite at that point with Tony Pollard where like we're in it is what it is territory. Sort of kind of close to it is what it is territory though with Tony Pollard. And the regression part of it is a big deal here. And I remember having this conversation with Eckler a couple of weeks ago where it's hard from the outside, but I'm sure it's just as hard even sometimes on the inside, right? When you're a player thinking about this, we're like, all right, is it regression, or is it this guy's just not performing? And I think that was the thing with the whole, the red zone stuff, right? It's like, all right, well, yeah, if he keeps getting these opportunities in the red zone, eventually he will score a touchdown just by the law of averages. But are the coaches going to look at it and be like, we got to stop giving him these opportunities in the red zone because this is just not working, right? And I keep talking about the quote that haunts me with Tony Pollard is his running back coach being like, yeah, we're not just going to give him a bunch of work because that's not the best use of Tony Pollard. Like that would take away his explosiveness. And so far this season, like I don't really know how you disagree with that at this point, just because of how he has played so far in this lead back role. I really, and you're right to mention the injury too. I know I was among the people doing this. A lot of people were doing it, just kind of being like, yeah. He broke his leg in a playoff game, but at least it's not an Achilles tear. Like,
right.
It's still not nothing. He still broke his leg in a playoff game, right? So there's definitely a scenario where we get farther away from that. We get deeper into the season, and Pollard has these big games, right? Like producer Colin made the point that this is not the whole ground and pound offense that Mike McCarthy painted. That was never going to be what this offense was going to be. It's a pass first unit, and it should be a pass first unit. You'd like Tony Pollard to have more games like 7 targets, 6 catches, and 80 yards like he did against the Chargers. But because he's a running back and he's not Christian McCaffrey and he's not Austin Eckler, like he's going to have 1 catch games like he did against the Rams too.
Yeah. It's kind of rough all the way around. This is certainly not where I thought we would be if you'd told me that Tony Pollard was going to have exactly this role, this workload, this number of sort of red zone opportunities at the halfway mark of the season. I would have said, oh man, Dalton nailed this one. He's, he's the overall RB1, RB2, RB3. And it just, it hasn't happened. His efficiency has fallen off by something like 1.5 yards per carry, right? Like again, there's just not much after contact. And again, to the point of the original, the person who sent the original video, it's not exact. The touches aren't exactly the same as they were last year, and he is getting a chunk of that Zeke Elliott work. That it's.
And like
dirty.
Andy, it kind of has to be, right?
Yeah,
like if he's going to be the running back one for this team, I'm with you, Hoops, that like I would love to see some more outside runs with Pollard, and I think they kind of did that a little bit against the Rams. So I think that's a fair critique. But at the same time, like if you're going to be the RB1, you're going to have to take grinder carries. And like he just... It's just not the same. It's crazy too, Andy, by the way, that we started the season with a 2-touchdown game for Tony Pollard as well. He hasn't scored since, but we did start off with a 2-touchdown game in prime time on Sunday Night Football in week 1.
Yeah, and after that, I think I've drafted him twice in primetime picks. That hasn't worked out. I'm probably not doing that again. It's frustrating because he's seeing enough work for a very good team that there have to be good weeks out there. I just like, if it didn't happen this past week in that set of circumstances, I understand feeling pretty discouraged. Yeah.
I'm with you about panicking about Tony Pollard. We are allowing some panic here with Pollard.
Yeah.
I don't mind doing a little buy low situation for him if you can really buy low, but man, I mean, I imagine most people are still locked to the take of what it was in preseason, just kind of hoping at this point. So he's kind of going to be a tough guy to trade for. All right, let's move on to the next one here from Gavin B. Sends in, I am sure you're getting flooded with questions about Miles Sanders' groin. Oh my God, Miles Sanders is down so bad. And the impact of Matt Stafford's thumb on Puka and Kupp. But I've got a bit of a tricky quarterback question for you. We're 8 weeks into the season. I'm currently staring down the barrel of mediocrity. For most of the quarterbacks on my fantasy teams, I need to decide who to hold and who to cut bait on to make an unlikely run to the playoffs as we near Thanksgiving. So Gavin wants us to rank these 4 quarterbacks from most panicked to least panicked. Mac Jones, Desmond Ridder, Jordan Love, and Sam Howell, giving talks of trades and shifting sentiment. Also curious if you see any of these guys retaining their starting role through 2024. Love the show. Listen to it every morning on my commute. Appreciate it, Gavin. Thank you. So, Andy, Mac Jones, Desmond Ridder, Jordan Love, Sam Howell. Rank these in order of most to least panic, and do we see any of these guys keeping a job next season?
Yeah, I probably have them in the order that he listed them in terms of being most, panic feels like the wrong word with Mac Jones and Desmond Ridder, because it's not like your expectations were sky high coming into the year. But Desmond Ridder just sat half the game after being cleared from having a concussion, right? Like Desmond Ridder is at imminent risk of job loss. Mac Jones just lost like his one fully capable, competent veteran receiver. And it's not like he was, playing at a high level before that happened. Jordan Love has been super messy. He might have a slightly better chance of retaining that job into next year. I have no idea. Like the one guy here, it's funny that I feel most confident about is actually Sam Howell. Like I don't, especially after this past week, and it's always messy with Sam Howell. And you probably, if there's one player that you can roster and then just maybe not tune in that particular game and not have to suffer through it, it's probably Sam Howell. It's not always pretty how he gets there, but he generally gets to a pretty good fantasy total, right? He's coming off 397, 4 touchdowns. One of the best games that we've seen him play. Still made a couple of throws that you're like, wow, that could have ended this game right there. But got away with it for the most part. Good game for him, and he's also tied to a great receiving core. So I probably feel best about Sam Howell here. And of anybody I'm looking at, I'd say that Sam Howell has the best chance to retain that job into 2024. He's also we've got 4 games right now with Sam Howell throwing multiple touchdown passes. I don't know if he can stay healthy all year. He's still on pace for almost 90 sacks, which is crazy. But if he does for however long he does, he probably has the most fantasy appeal for me.
Yeah. I definitely think he has the most fantasy appeal the rest of the season for sure. And I think he's a guy you can probably get away with as your quarterback one. He's definitely in that area. The other guys, obviously, they're not big fantasy factors generally, but I think from just a real life perspective, I think my level of panic from most to least would go Desmond Ridder, most panicked, Mac Jones. Panic's not really the right word. I just think he is another is what he is guy that probably shouldn't have been needs so much around him to go right to be the guy. And they haven't really gotten anything right around him. So it's kind of hard to do the chicken and egg thing with Mac Jones. Jordan Love, I'm kind of in the same boat with him too, where I actually think he does show the tools, and I think he's gotten a bit too much crap for how things have gone. He hasn't been good, but everybody's like, oh my God, yeah, Jordan Love, he's the problem. Hey, he might be one of the problems, but there's a lot of problems on this Packers offense right now. I mean, there's a reason damn Christian Watson, who was supposed to be their best receiver, is in the freaking coping corner. And that's not all Jordan Love's fault, okay?
Yeah.
And then Sam Howell, I think I'm least panicked about, but I'd almost give it no shot that he's the starting quarterback next year, just because or at least the set it and forget it starting quarterback for the Commanders next year. Cause Ron Rivera's definitely got to be out of there. I haven't seen anything from Eric Bieniemy that's he should be the head coach in waiting. And it's a new ownership group that will probably blow everything up and start over next year. And Howell will get wiped away in the same, he might go on to be a Ryan Fitzpatrick type of veteran backup that every time he gets on the field, we're like, hey, that's who Sam Howell should be. It'd be oh my God, Sam Howell's starting, fire up Terry McLaurin, baby. Let's go. Instead of just we got to live through Sam Howell every single week. It's a slog with some of these wide receivers. So I think Howell can settle into that role. I think Love actually has a shot to still be the Packers starter next year. The other guys, I think it's probably over.
Man, I love that call on Sam Howell as the next Ryan Fitzpatrick one, because we need a next Ryan Fitzpatrick. How fun was it when Ryan Fitzpatrick stumbled into a starting job? We're going to need Sam Howell to be a little bit more ostentatious, a little bit of a flashier dresser. But he's got plenty of time. He's got a full career ahead of him. I love this.
Yeah, we need to get him in a pair of jorts, like Gardner Minshew.
Yeah.
Right? Hey, Minshew's kind of doing the Fitzpatrick thing at this point, where
that's
right,
true.
He comes in there. It's not so bad. He's definitely not a star. You'll get a few knuckleheads that'll be he's probably one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the NFL, and he should be starting. It's okay, let's calm down with that, because he turns the ball over like crazy. But it's good for us in fantasy. So, all right, let's move on to the next one here. Barrett R sends in, hey, Matt and Andy, first time, long time. While Zay Flowers hasn't had any real boom games due to lack of touchdowns, he's had a pretty decent floor compared to most Baltimore wide receivers, with at least 50 yards in 6 of 7 games entering this week. The floor fell out, though, in week 8. Does this week's 19-yard dud, combined with Todd Monken's vice for wide receiver screen low ADOT usage, give you any pause, or am I being overly dramatic?
I don't know that you're being overly dramatic. This is obviously the floor game for Zay Flowers, and he still caught, how many passes did he catch? Did he catch 5 balls? It was a weird game, right? He caught an acceptable number of passes, but there were just no yards there. And you're right. His particular usage is it's kind of in the tight end zone. He's got an ADOT in the 7s. He's got a bunch of tight ends around him in terms of the ADOT leaderboard, right? He's not like the deep downfield target. We're not going to get these highlight, 40-yard downfield plays necessarily from him, but we are going to get some volume. And if you need to think of him more along the lines of like, man, this is what the lines are going to look like from like Josh Downs, that's okay, right? Like that's fine. It's not. I don't mean to say that it's exactly the same usage, but like the weekly lines are going to look like that. I don't think that you drafted him at a spot where you're banking on wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 numbers. I think Zay Flowers has settled into a place where he's going to be a really consistent sort of high floor PPR scorer. And that's not what we really look for in rookies. That's not necessarily what we expect in rookies, but that is probably what you're going to get.
I really like that, thinking about him as if he's Josh Downs. What's funny though, Andy, is you mentioned the average depth of targets like around 7 or whatever. I would venture to guess he's never actually caught a 7-yard pass. It's averaging out that way because he either catches a -2 air yard pass, like behind the line of scrimmage, he catches like a 1-yard little pop pass, or it is like the deep shot down the field. They're really not using him at all in that intermediate area. And I kind of disagree. Like, I know some people said he's not beating NFL corners. I think he has been. I think they just haven't fully utilized him there yet. And he's a rookie receiver. He might be hitting a rookie wall. We don't know about that stuff. I think he's been a very good player, but I'm with you that I'm adjusting those expectations back a little, where to start the season, I'm like, all right, this guy's starting to put it together, and like the Ravens pass attack is ready to rise. It has kind of risen. He just hasn't necessarily risen along with it. And we're also, look, far be it from me to be the guy to point this out, but we are seeing some pretty good stuff out of Rashad Bateman of late too. Like, he's had a couple of nice little moments. We're looking to clear a pretty low bar with Rashad Bateman, but we've seen him clear that bar the last couple of weeks. Like, it's not going to just be the Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers show, which it was at times this year, but that's probably good for the overall offense.
No, that's a really good point. When everybody's healthy, this is clearly not going to be one of those like Vikings only throw it to Thielen and Diggs sort of situations. This is going to be, everybody in the pool. Odell's going to get targets when healthy. Aguilar's clearly still getting targets. Rashad Bateman is going to still get targets. Like, they're throwing to a bunch of dudes. It's not exclusive. It may feel recently like it's almost exclusively Mark Andrews, and he's been great. But it's not exclusively Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews. There's other people involved here, and they're going to stay involved.
All right, next one up from Michael B., and we absolutely got to talk about this guy on this podcast. Mentions Chris Olave. Feels solid looking at him in my lineup before the week, but I never feel great after. Bad fundamentals, low effort. Is Carr upset with Olave for valid reasons this season? Look, I'm no tape bro. Clearly an ETR subscriber. Look, I'm no tape bro, but I can't seem to escape game clips each week of Olave getting out of breaks sloppily, being unprepared for balls hit his way, giving up on routes, etc. This week, a ball straight up hit him in the helmet before he could look up on what looked like it would have been a clear house call. I'm curious, what do we know about this guy's vibes? He had the speeding ticket before the week, and things just don't seem right in New Orleans. 30-plus-year-old Michael Thomas is earning targets. Shaheed is having huge weeks, but Olave just can't seem to get right despite the target volume and air yards, even in a shootout. Is it time to panic on Olave, or are we just tempering the wide receiver 1 upside hopes we had for him on draft day? Low wide receiver 2 until we get a sign that him and Carr's chemistry is clicking, or do we hit the silent panic button and look to return value while we can? Once your competitors know you're panicked, they're less likely to buy. Would you sell Chris Olave for T. Higgins, for example? Have a great week, Michael. Andy, normally I'm here. I'm going to let you go first on this one because I think people have an expectation of what I'm about to say about this situation. It's probably not the reality. So you tell me what you think about Chris Olave first.
First of all, the way that Derek Carr handled disappointment a couple weeks ago on a specific route where it turns out I think Chris Olave was basically a clear out and was not a primary out. That was super weird and is not something that like a veteran pro quarterback should be doing to his young receiver. That was just
correct. That
was really strange. That was bad. And if that is influencing the way that you think about Chris Olave, I don't think that's entirely on Olave. I get it that the lines haven't been completely clean or compelling over the last like 3 weeks. It's hard for me to get away from the targets here. I mean, 9 targets this past week, 15 the week before, 10 the week before that. So like volume is definitely going his way and production will eventually follow volume, right? Like Carr is almost never a clinic, but they are putting the ball in the air a bunch. He's got, a string of 300-yard games here. What gets me about this question is that it actually ended with something very specific, which is whether I would trade Chris Olave for T. Higgins. And I'm thinking about that. Like I think I would. And I'm not even like the big T. Higgins guy. But I think I might take that deal if that is actually on the table, because for me, Higgins, when healthy, and I thought Higgins had a nice, like, sort of proof of concept week here. I needed to see him function like the usual T. Higgins, and I thought he basically did. He didn't have a noisy fantasy week, but it was noisy enough to make me feel better about Higgins. I think I might take that deal in part just because I love the way Cincinnati is playing. It's hard not to love the way Joe Burrow is playing right now, and like the difference between those two quarterbacks is significant enough that if this deal is really on the table, I would probably do it.
I'm probably not making that deal just because I still think the upside is kind of capped with T. Higgins, just generally because he's a second receiver. But man, I tell you what, though, you're totally right. Like Derek Carr looked like an idiot for how he handled the situation on Thursday night, and especially in that specific moment. Like, he doesn't come out looking good on that. He hasn't come out looking good on a lot of reasons this season. But he's got to be right to be pissed with Olave at this point. And I don't really know what it is, but like, I mean, that the play that Michael is talking about, that like the ball just hits Chris Olave in the face. I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, and he did just get arrested recently. I have met Chris Olave and talked to Chris Olave pretty briefly one time. Seemed like a nice guy, seemed like kind of a boring guy. So if we're talking about vibes, like, struck me as a pretty normal guy. I don't know anything about him beyond the one conversation I've had. So I don't have a good vibes situation. Like, really like talking about wide receiver stuff, routes, things like that. He's a very good route runner. You could tell he was like a pro at the collegiate level. So he's obviously a hard worker, but something's up, man. Like, I don't know what it is. It just is really weird to watch, like the slow pace on the routes, the quitting on the routes sometime, like, and just the odd chemistry and vibes between him and Derek Carr. It just makes you think like there's more to this story. And that being said, like, something like that could immediately flip at any time, because Olave, I think, does have the talent to be a top 10 receiver in the NFL right now. And I'm not saying he's played poorly this year, but he's played like a top 20 NFL receiver in a crappy offense as opposed to a top 10 receiver in a crappy offense. And I think that's borne out in the numbers so far. So I think that's just like, we're very, very tempted and very, very quick in the fantasy industry, Andy, and I am guilty of this as anybody, because I'm the lead lobbyist for big wide receiver, but we are so quick to be like, immediately put the blame on Derek Carr. And Derek Carr he's got to wear the blame for a lot that's gone on in New Orleans so far this year, but like, Chris Olave needs to also get the share of the blame that in this particular situation.
Yeah, no, it's fair. I realized as you were speaking that I just kind of bailed on the whole idea of like what the vibes are there, because I don't know. So also, like, it's sports, it's pro sports. Sometimes dudes just yell at each other, and like it's fine, and it's fine 15 minutes later, it's fine a minute later, and we get worked up about it, but it is not a real thing. Like, that happens. I don't know. That happens.
The AJ Brown thing from earlier this year. Perfect example.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like this stuff happens all the time. Sometimes the cameras catch it. Sometimes they don't. So I don't usually get worked up about stuff like that, but I would concede that it has not been entirely clean for Olave so far. And I understand somebody who's just looking at a standard box score and they see, oh man, it was another, triple-digit yardage game for Rashid Shaheed, and he found the end zone again, and wouldn't that be nice? But man, at some point, you've got to be like, Shaheed he's getting 3 targets a game, and I know they're deep downfield targets, and I know they're traveling like 50 yards in the air or whatever, but that is just not a path to weekly production. That Shaheed probably has 1 or 2 spike weeks left in him. You're not going to see him coming. There's just no comparison between the volume between those two players right now, and I think the best version of Chris Olave is still a super useful player.
All right, let's move a little quickly through our social media suggestions here. One of which comes in from @Bowie8_Bowie. Okay, I am panicking a little bit about the Vikings offense as a whole after Kirk Cousins torn Achilles. I do, however, believe that when Nick Mullins comes off IR, he will be able to keep the ship afloat as he did with the 49ers. I know Nick Mullins is one of your favorite players, Andy, so regardless, it's still pretty tough when you're like, when Nick Mullins returns, he could keep the ship afloat. Maybe if they sign Colt McCoy, he can keep the ship afloat or something. I don't know. I'm definitely panicked about the Vikings offense without Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I don't know how you can't be, right. Like I don't like Nick Mullins because he took a job that should have rightly belonged to CJ Beathard. That's my guy. And if all we're saying here is that Nick Mullins is perhaps good enough to keep Justin Jefferson viable as a wide receiver one when he's back, and Jordan Addison and our fantasy plans and all that, sure, he can probably do that. But like, the ship is gonna sink. Like the actual Minnesota, the trajectory of the Vikings season is definitely gonna sink if they have to deal with the downgrade between Kirk Cousins, who was playing great, and Nick Mullins, who always puts the ball at risk like 4 or 5 times a game. I think that's kind of the Mullins issue, is that you're gonna get some drive killing moments that just would not have happened with Kirk Cousins. So like in real life, very, very bad for the Vikings. I agree that Mullins might be able to, I don't know, patch things together enough that the right guys still have some fantasy value. But there's no, I don't know. I wish I had a good answer for teams that lose a very good quarterback in the middle of the season, but there's usually no way out, But by the time people listen to this podcast, I don't know, Kyler Murray could be dealt. All sorts of players could be, Jacoby Brissett could be dealt. I have no idea what's going to happen, but all these guys have to learn an entire new system and meet new players. And it's just not as simple. Like everybody knows this. Quarterback is not just some plug and play position in the NFL. Way too hard, way too complicated for that. So there's no easy fix. I can't give you a spin that makes you feel that much better about your Minnesota receiving options.
Next one comes in from @Chris_Kianci. Cooper Kupp / Puka if Stafford is out long term. We got news today that they're considering putting Matthew Stafford on injured reserve, and Cooper Kupp has had 2 down games in a row. I don't know if I'm panicking about Cooper Kupp the individual. I have to go back and watch the routes and chart him and everything to know that for sure. But I'm 100% panicked about him from a production standpoint, and Puka if there's no Matthew Stafford here. I mean, Stafford is the kingmaker. He's made these guys kings before. I can't imagine Brett Rippon's about to do that.
Yeah, I fully agree with this. This is really a rough one. I don't have any sunshine for you on this. You just need to really, really hope that Matt Stafford can be back within a couple of weeks. Because I know I've talked about it before on the pod. I thought Stafford was playing so well, that the ball was coming out of his hands so well. He's made some just absolutely sick throws this year, and we're 100% not getting that from Brett Rippon.
Final one we'll do here @Man_Life4. Love that Twitter handle. CJ Stroud's performance after a bye wasn't good. Small panic, but love to hear you ease my mind. We kind of got a lot of submissions about Nico Collins, Tank Dell, CJ Stroud, a lot of Texans passing game stuff. We talked about Dameon Pierce. He's in the coping corner. But are you concerned about these Texans receivers or CJ Stroud? I'll say for me personally, the answer is probably no.
Yeah. Congratulations to CJ Stroud for rising up the ranks to the point that fantasy managers are panicking about him. That's pretty awesome from where he was at the beginning of the year when no one was touching him, right? I get it. He's been a really nice plug and play quarterback. He's been super impressive. I think you gotta, I don't know, this is a rookie in the middle of his first season. And I think you have to allow for the fact that not every game was going to be an absolute clinic in which this is all sorts of new things in this offense, right? Like they're gonna stumble occasionally, and it's a bit surprising to see it happen against Carolina. But I don't think you were regarding CJ Stroud as somebody who was going to single-handedly carry you through the rest of your fantasy season and into the fantasy playoffs and all that. He's a really good streaming option, and if you've lost a quarterback, I think he's a good option going forward. But he's also not, he's not headed for the top tier at the position anytime soon. It might happen down the road, but it's not happening this year. I feel fine about CJ Stroud. I love his receivers too.
Yeah, Tampa Bay, Cincinnati, Arizona, next 3 matchups. Neither of those are a stay away. None of those are a stay away. And look, yeah, it's always disappointing when a guy doesn't smash in a potential smash spot, which is what happened with all of your Texans this week against the Panthers. But stuff like that happens. And I am glad that Man versus Life included the bye week note here, because I feel like I say this every single week, mostly about rookies. We're talking about a rookie quarterback. Like, just going to reiterate the point. The bye week is not magic. Okay. The bye week is not a little thing like pixie dust that we just sprinkle on. And like right after that, these guys are just going to be rolling. Can we probably over the course of a season track a player's progress and be like, yep, they were better in their rookie season after the bye than before the bye? A, yes, probably that's true. B, it's a case-by-case example. And C, CJ Stroud was really good before his bye week. You know, he just happened to have a stumble moment here against a team that absolutely did not want to lose to CJ Stroud. Like,
yes, right.
Under no circumstances could Frank Reich, I mean, I don't even know if the guy can look himself in the mirror right now at this point anyways. I don't know if he's sleeping at night. I don't know what the deal is with Frank Reich, but I can tell you whatever the deal is, it would have been way worse. Way worse. He's already talked about his Monday morning meetings or whatever with David Tepper sucks. Could you imagine how much they'd suck? Even if it's Tepper's fault that they drafted Bryce Young, could you imagine how much that meeting would suck if they lost CJ Stroud? They definitely, that would be bad. Okay, so I'm not saying that's why CJ Stroud didn't have the game you wanted in fantasy, but might be part of the reason. So generally, I'm not concerned about these Texans guys at all. Again, I understand and sympathize because this happens to me too. When a guy doesn't smash when I expect him to smash, it's tough. But I think we stay the course with CJ Stroud and the boys here.
Yeah, I think you're right here. I think this is just someone who was expecting that they were going to get like 280 and 3 touchdowns because it did look like a good spot on paper and they didn't get it. So they're upset. Obviously, CJ Stroud, a good player, and he's surrounded by, excellent receiving core and fun talent.
I bet the over on CJ Stroud touchdowns, passing touchdowns, 1.5 at plus odds. And I'm like, plus odds? Ooh, give me that. He's going to smash against these Panthers.
Yeah.
And he recorded the same amount of passing touchdowns as Andy/Arthur Smith on Sunday. Okay. So I'm with you, Man versus Life. I am also upset about this. But hey, you wanted me to ease your mind. I hope we eased your mind here with this one. All right. With that, let's ease the concerns of people who need help on the waiver wire this week, Andy. Yeah, straighten the mustache. Get yourself ready here because you're going to give us the top 5 waiver wire pickups of the week. Let's hear it, Andy.
Yeah, let me see if I can spit this out before the mustache flies off. I think that's about to happen. I think we're minutes away.
You look like you're in a tough spot there with that mustache.
It's droopy. It's droopy a little bit. I thought I really had proper adhesive on here. Maybe not. My number 5 is going to be Emari Demercado. And I realize we've talked about him a couple times before. He just played 60% of the snaps against Baltimore, finished with, it was fine. You didn't win your week with it, but it was 79 yards on 21 touches, dominated the workload for a second straight week. My one caveat here, and we're recording this on Monday, so I don't have any injury info, anything like that, but he had pretty minimal playing time in the fourth quarter. Keontae Ingram came on the field. Maybe that was just like we're going hurry up the rest of the way and they felt better about Ingram. I have no idea. But Demercado did lose some playing time late in the game, but he'd been an absolute workhorse for 3 quarters. So I think we can feel pretty good about him moving forward, at least for another week or two. Depending on James Conner's status. My number 4, it's got to be Taysom Hill. Hill has been a top 6 fantasy tight end in 3 straight weeks. I know he's not exactly a tight end. He's not exactly a quarterback. He's not exactly a running back. I don't know exactly what to call him. But he absolutely filled the box score against Indy. 44 passing yards, 14 receiving yards, 63 yards on the ground, couple of rushing scores. He gets Chicago next, so the matchup is great. My number 3, it's going to be Trey McBride. This is an actual tight end who just saw 14 targets, caught 10 balls, 95 yards, a touchdown against Baltimore in a difficult matchup. That is, shout out to JJ Zacharyson, that is the highest single game target share of any tight end this season. So that's a workload that is basically reserved for like Kelsey, Andrews, guys like that. So absolutely stellar workload situation there. Questions at the quarterback position, obviously, for that team, but very few questions regarding McBride's role, especially while Zach Ertz is out. My number 2, who I'm a little bit surprised is still eligible for this discussion, is Darrell Henderson, who, as of the last time I looked at it, was only 45% rostered. He had 85 yards on 15 touches. It was another week as the primary runner ahead of or in combination with Royce Freeman. He's about to face Green Bay. They're the NFL's number 27 ranked run defense, so it is a good spot. It's not, obviously, if we don't get Matthew Stafford at the controls, it's, the offense is a little bit sketchy, but we can count on a huge workload from Henderson. And then my number 1 And I wanted to list a quarterback here because there's a really good chance that anybody listening this deep into the podcast lost a quarterback this week because they all went down. My number one is Sam Howell. He just threw for 397 yards, not his first time over 300 yards this season. 4 touchdowns against a pretty frisky Eagles defense. This is his 4th game with multiple TD passes, also his 4th game with over 290 passing yards. He's not traditionally great, right? And there are some head-scratching moments, and there are some ugly throws. And again, he's on pace for like 87 sacks on the season. He does a lot of things wrong, but he finds a way to decent point totals a fair amount of the time. He's got New England next. It's not a matchup that I'm necessarily staying away from. Howell's one of those fun quarterbacks where like I can recommend the quarterback as a pickup, and I can recommend the defense facing the quarterback as a pickup, which I did this week with the Patriots, right? Like Howell generally, he didn't do this against Philly, but he's generally giving you 4 to 7 sacks each week. So you can stream against him and you can stream him.
Even better, you can usually stream the quarterback that's playing against his defense too, because they're just so prone to coverage busts. I don't know if anyone out there has the stones to stream Mac Jones, who just lost his best receiver, and his best receiver was Kendrick Bourne. But I mean, could he Mickey Mouse his way to a 100-yard game out of Demario Douglas, who I kind of like, by the way? But I mean, you know, that would be a miracle, but it could work against his defense. Just to circle back to Taysom Hill, and we can end it on this. It's just outrageous that we get to this moment every year with Taysom Hill.
Yeah.
And even better, Andy, this year, not only are they still doing Taysom Hill stuff, they're doing it even better than they used to do it, because now they've got, you know, Kalen Saunders, this big defensive tackle wearing 99, involved as like the lead back when Taysom Hill takes like wildcat snaps. It's just outrageous. And the play is so good. It's like move over, tush push. The Hill Saunders package is the most dangerous in the NFL, the most efficient right now. I mean, it's crazy stuff.
And Saunders is a house, by the way.
Oh, he's
it's
huge.
Really fun.
He's huge. I don't even know what his listed listed weights are on notice on this podcast after Austin Eckler has admitted like several times that he's 5'8" and like 195, despite what his listed weight is. But nevertheless, Kalen Saunders is still 6 foot, 324 pounds, and I'll take the over on 324 again with the listed weight stuff. And they have this guy lead blocking for Taysom Hill. It's absolutely outrageous.
Yeah, love it. He's fun. It's also like, it's one of those positions where, you know, once you string together a bunch of weeks where you're like a top 5, top 6 guy, you're almost certainly going to finish the season in the top 10. I mean, he's probably clinched that already. Like it's outside the top 5. It's just such a minefield. I think he's actually a pretty fun play rest of season. Totally.
Just know that the moment you feel the same as Andy and you feel that confidence is there, you're getting 2 points out of him. Just accept that that's going to happen. Put that thought in the coping corner and you'll be okay. All right. Andy, Arthur Smith, appreciate it. I'm going to get you out of here before your mustache falls off. So that is
so close.
It is so close. It's dangerously close. All right.
Oh, there it goes.
There it is. All right. Well, now we can end the show as Andy tries to fix his mustache on the other side. That is going to do it on Wednesday. Eckler's Edge is back. There's plenty to talk about. Should be another fun one tomorrow. Until then, we're out.